jump into the speed rating. I feel like there were lots of comments going on throughout the live stream, so it sounded like basically everyone was there watching. And we really enjoyed putting all of the pieces together, but unfortunately we only had 10 minutes with each person, and not everyone was there for each of our meetings with the composers, and also we haven't had a chance to work with absolutely all the composers before that on our longer rehearsals. So I guess to start, we wanted to open the floor. If there were any kind of developmental questions, or that doesn't really make sense, but questions you had developing on what we either worked on in those 10 minutes but didn't really have time to go deeper, or if you were an audience member and there was something that you found super neat or super cool, and wanted to ask about maybe some of the artistic choices that we made in order to make things happen. I know, at least on my end, for the solo pieces, I had a lot of freedom because I didn't have to quickly coordinate things with my colleagues in 2 days. So yeah, I just want to open it up. We have 2 monitors, so we're able to access the chat if people want to type in questions, or just either Elizabeth or Serena, if you're able to control the unmuting if people raise their hand through Zoom, stuff like that. Does that work?
Sure. I have a question just because it came up with the top of my head. So I'm Karen Brown. I wrote the score Blender,
Yes.
and you guys did an absolutely wonderful job. First, I want to say. So I really had a question. So I mean, my piece, I end it with just a kind of short recapitulation, and I have a crescendo through that recap, right? And what I found on speed reads and stuff like that, with my music a lot, I'll have large crescendos going through stuff, but especially on speed reads or reading sessions, people hit that recap and they assume it's a flat dynamic. Just really interesting. Are there other markings I could give to players to tell them to push through? I probably should have just put it in words, but even something, I don't know, maybe there's a lot of things that I'm not thinking of to communicate to players there.
Yeah, there are maybe, yeah, Eva's going to show what's happening here. I think there are a couple of things happening with this. One is, if I'm counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I see a 15 measure crescendo, which I would say is on the long side. So part of it is probably remembering that we have a crescendo for this long. Part of it is probably the ability to crescendo this long is actually difficult.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Especially since we're starting already relatively loud. I don't know. Probably if we had more time to go through this, what I would suggest is, you know what? Let's start quieter than mezzo forte, and that can sort of help us out.
Well, I guess this thing I struggle. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You're right that there probably is another way, the word crescendo here and there can help, but part of it is also technical difficulty. Would you say, is that fair? In this particular case.
Yeah, so I guess I always have this struggle, and I've actually separated it out when I write pieces with software. I'll have 2 different 2-dimensional dynamics, because often I find the dynamics are the phrasing and the phrasings are the dynamics, but I kind of, phrasing wise I want this thing to push forward the whole way, but dynamically I also want to show that you see what I'm saying? There's a conflict of traditional notation there that makes me uncomfortable, so I've always wanted to ask Quartet that kind of thing.
Yeah. Karen, this is Sean talking. I would suggest even making it a bigger deal with words. A double bar or the 2/4 right there at measure 35, just putting build to the end. All of a sudden that becomes a very big deal to the form of the music.
Yeah.
Another thought is and this is just for any of you who are performers, maybe you can relate to this. Having to see a hairpin go that long makes it very much be part of the texture that you're just taking in. Writing the word crescendo right after the initial dynamic in bar 35 is going to force us to have to take that extra step to look at, where does this go to? And even though you technically could do that with the hairpin too, it's just a great way of forcing us to have to think or look at it slightly more in a different way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very cool piece, by the way.
Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I'm Sydney. I wrote oh my God, what's it called? The Dust That Floats High in June. Um, so I have a quick question just about the nature of the piece. It gave you a lot of freedom, and I was wondering, as you know, performers who were working under a short amount of time to learn and work on a piece. How did that affect your experience with it? And did it hinder or did it help or a little both or like just maybe talk?
So you're asking about how does a short time pressure impact learning a piece like that, or is it
Well, like with the freedom that I gave you because I left a lot of the decisions um, for the piece to be made, but well, maybe not a lot of the decisions, but I gave you some amount of freedom. And is that something that sort of helps your experience with this, or did it make it more challenging, or does it not matter?
well, just to kind of recap for everyone, Sydney's piece was composed of several cells, and it was aleatoric in that Aviva and I could decide how frequently um, and how long to repeat each cell, and sort of what dynamics that we wanted to, um, use for them. So what Aviva and I did is we played through the piece, and I tried to source out sort of a larger shape um, that that would work with the piece. Um, because if you have experience with another player, you can sort of improvise your way through it. But often, unless you're really with it, the results from free choice in the middle of a performance may not be very convincing. It can, and so sort of we agreed to a loose plan of how each of the cells would go, and then that helps the piece tell more of a story from beginning to end. Um, so as far as the as far as having the freedom to choose the dynamics and also to choose the amount of repetitions and everything, I would say that comes down to your personal trust in your performers as a composer. Um, because you might have two people who play it and they put into the music as much as they want to, and you might go, rats. You might have two other people who play it and you go, oh, wow, that was awesome. There's so much in that piece that I didn't know was there. And so that's always the question of, how much do you specify in a score and how much do you leave open? It comes down to the trust of the performer.
I'm going to take a couple minutes to tell a story about this particular question that took place in Charlotte last year. I'm not going to say any names, but
One day.
we had an aleatoric piece where we were able to choose different cells independently of each other. He had a set amount of time that the piece would last, and what we found was that even though we play together all the time, and I see them more than I see my wife or family. Some of the times, the end result would be something that was very effective, but some of the times, it didn't work at all. It fell flat because there's that element of chance, and if the element of chance is what is most important to you, then I suppose that's fine. You're okay with some not being as convincing as others. Of course, convincing being very subjective. We have a pretty similar idea, I think, of what we would consider convincing. Whereas if we have a rough plan, even in an aleatoric piece, we have a really nice way of sculpting that path. And it puts us in the same mind frame. It gives us similar goals. And we're just way more likely to get something closer to a version that we consider effective. So now for the story. This composer really did not want us to have a plan. In the moment we suggested something, because he heard this, what we were talking about. A couple of the run-throughs went very well, and a couple weren't so great. So we were sort of diving into this, and we proposed, what if we have this shape? We'll come down at this about this time. We'll come up together here. We'll try to be on these cells in this area, and we'll round it out at the end. It'll be a nice, arc. He really did not like this idea. But then he had to run to the restroom. And while he was out of the room, I said, okay, let's make a plan and make an arc, but let's not tell him. And let's just play it like this. So he came back, and we played the piece, and I kid you not, the look on his face, he was so excited and happy at this beautiful thing that from his perspective just happened. And I felt a little dirty because we were deceiving him, but to me it was actually a genuine experiment. I wanted to know, was this what he's after attainable? Can we give the illusion of we just happened to get this? Or, is it worth something sculpting? Now, when we told him that we had sculpted, it was shock on his face. And I think if you talk to him today, I could not say what his thoughts were about it. But in that moment, he said, okay, yeah, do the shape. But, he's still got some of the freedom. I don't know if that's valuable to anybody, but I know that for me as a performer, that was a really interesting thing to see and experience. And I know it has affected other things since then.
I'm gonna jump in. I loved watching some of your reactions. Karen wrote betrayal in a way that was kind of the look on his face, or this person's face rather. I want to step in though as a composer and say that a lot of the time concepts get in the way of what our job is as performers. Concepts are absolutely important, but if the listener has to understand the concept for them to have a great experience, we as performers have an issue with that, because our goal is for every single person that we perform for to leave having been moved in some way. Now, they might not like it, but they still have an opinion on it. And so we want to be as effective as we can. And that's an example, the story that Jason tells, where we understood the concept, but we thought we needed to add some artifices to make that concept happen in a way that you maybe wouldn't think of if your thought is stopping at the score. So it was actually a really fun learning experience for all of us involved.
One more thing to add to that is, of course, we all had our opinion. We agreed we preferred this way. However, if this gentleman had told me, you know what, I still prefer that idea of chance, and then if it falls flat, that's part of it. That's a possibility. I would have said, oh, okay, well, let's do it that way. I'm fine with that. In a way, that is a preference. As a performer, I know which way is more important to me, but it might not be the same as you. But hopefully that info might affect your thoughts on this.
Anyone else on anything with the speed writing, or any one of the composers that were playing your longer pieces? Anything on that as well?
If anybody has anything to say, just feel free to unmute your microphone and just speak up.
Also, for any of you composers, if we're playing one of your pieces, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the speed writing. We thought the speed writing might be helpful because you were forced to churn this out so quickly on material that maybe some people were just getting to know. Go, 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 go. And then not only did we get barely any time with you, but we didn't get something that is incredibly valuable to each of us, is to talk to you about it, what you thought afterwards. What did you like? What would you have done differently? What didn't work? What did work? What would you want to explore? For me, after a concert, I generally do not like speaking to the audience. It's part of the job, but I always find it really interesting to talk to a composer who maybe just heard his piece for the first time, or she heard his piece for the first time. It's really, so you can keep that in mind too. So this also goes for anybody, for any of your other pieces if we're playing as well.
I think for me with the speed writing kind of actually surprisingly caused me to be more experimental with my writing than I normally would without it, because I had less time to second guess what I was writing. And so it was kind of like, okay, I think I like this. This is the decision I need to make. I don't have time to second guess it. So yeah, like I use a little bit more extended technique than I would in that given like in that short period of a time. So yeah.
Do you think that was beneficial? Did you find things that you would use again?
I've done a lot of research about strings like in the past. So it was, some of it was techniques that I had learned about like in the time since I last wrote for strings. So yeah, I mean, I probably won't write for a triple hard chop again because I realized that I can just instruct the violinist, violist, cellist, whatever, to just use more pressure and get basically the same effect to an extent, like orally, because I meant orally, because it's not as well known of a technique. So if I have something that is easier, why not instruct the player to do that?
Sure, and that might come down to context too. You might come across a fiddle player who might think the opposite. You'll say triple chop and they'll say, oh yeah. So again, the sad thing about all this stuff is there is no perfect answer.
Yeah, I think also a similar thing that maybe a couple of you we've talked about harmonics and stuff, and I think some of you are discovering that. Well, yes, often there are different ways of writing harmonics, but also exactly where you're kind of telling a person to play it like a third above a given string. Well, you can get the exact same pitch more reliably if you write it a different way, that sort of stuff. And that's just it. You know, it's like with time and experience with different players, they'll usually guide you and say, oh, are you looking really for this color, or is this like basically exactly the same? That sort of stuff is, yeah, I think we have come across that a couple times.
It just forces you to just really like trust your ear. You don't really have like room for error. So it's just like I try to download as much as I can in my head, like what I want the concept to be, and then just like, transfer it.
Was that Harvey? Yeah.
That's me. Yeah.
Hey, Harvey.
Hey, what's going on?
Time.
Well, since we seem to be questioned out, I want to jump into something else. Can we pull up Brittany's quartet, Bach Unraveled? Brittany, I hope you don't mind.
I don't.
we had a couple really interesting instances, both in the speed writing and in one of our rehearsals, where the tempo became a huge issue, where either something was written incorrectly or a mistake wasn't caught, and we had to very quickly basically double the speed of what we were playing. And it's easy to get hung up on, especially with the speed writing. We really harp on this idea of don't make something too difficult so that we can focus on other things. The problem is that's a really subjective thing, and sometimes it's hard to know what is difficult and what is not. What is conceptually difficult might be very simple to actuate on our part, and vice versa. So I thought what we would do is we're just going to play Brittany's quartet. It's very short for the speed writing, and then we're going to make a lot of changes right on the spot. We're not going to try it. We're going to talk about it, and then play it a completely different way, just to give you guys a sense of what we can change quickly and how big of a difference that can make just basically on the spot. So here's what it was originally.
Yeah.
We're just going to pull it up.
Well,
Oh, but we have to turn pages.
Nah, that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay, so now that you have that in your ear, I'm actually going to backtrack a little. Before we do what I said we were going to do originally, I want to actually focus and show you guys the thing that we practiced. We gave ourselves basically 10 minutes with each piece, and because we're here in my home studio, we actually don't have the luxury of being able to go into different rooms and do things at the same time like we normally would do. So we really had to stick to a strict schedule here in this one room. So here's one of the first places that we actually really had to look at. Can we start from 13?
Hey guys, before you guys start one more time, do you mind fixing the audio somehow? It's sounding pretty glitchy for us on our ends. Whatever you guys did last time to fix that worked. That's a lot better.
Unfortunately, we're not really changing anything. They're just program glitches.
Well, it's still a little glitchy. Let's see.
That better?
It's a little bit better.
So there's a couple things that we could choose to focus on. One, she very thoughtfully writes hauntingly at the beginning. So we could right away step into the character of it, which is what we try to do, even when we're not speed reading. We're trying to not just approach it from a conceptual or a technical standpoint, but already trying to get into the character of it, so that way it can actually address some of the technical issues. Let's start, in 17. We're going to start in 17, and you have this hocketed rhythm kind of taken from the fugue, and we're going to each focus on being in a character, but we're not going to focus on being in each other's sense of rhythm. We're going to be in our own sense of rhythm, and we're going to each be dedicated to bringing across this haunting quality. So I'm guessing, assuming all of the glitches and everything are fixed out, even though they would add to the haunting quality of this, I'm guessing that sounded very different. I'm guessing it sounded a little uncomfortable. I'm guessing it sounded a lot like 3 players. Going back to the presentation we did, you definitely are hearing 3 voices, but it was in tune. It was almost together, depending on how you're using that word, and we were each finding a color that we were trying to use. Well, now let's do the opposite. We're going to take out, we're not going to worry about playing hauntingly. We're not going to worry about color. We're going to just try and be exactly rhythmically together. Okay, so here's the other end of the coin. Now, ensemble-wise, it is absolutely together. Each of the chord changes are together. And by the way, when we say together, we don't just mean that it is rhythmically lining up. We mean that all of the sounds that we're producing are starting at the same time. To achieve that, we're each having to move our bows at slightly different times. Ryan has a thicker string. That takes more impetus to happen. Jason and Aviva have very thin strings. They don't need as much start power. So keep in mind that even though we're talking about being together, quarter notes, very simple on the page, what we're actually doing is a lot more complicated than that. We're trying to get the sound to start all at the same time. Now let's play it the way we actually want to play it. Okay, so hopefully this is the best of both worlds. It's haunting, it has a color, it's together. Now the reason I'm breaking all this down for you, we didn't touch these bars except for in a run through. So all of the things that we did with that was instinctual because we play together all the time and we're trying to read each other's body language. What we did spend time on might surprise you. Let's play 13, 14, 15. And here's how we spent time on it. It's going to be slow and boring and very still, and it's obvious, but you let us know what we're working on. What are we working on? right, John. Intonation. Intonation is the most difficult thing. We've all spent hours and hours and hours ditching dates and not going out to practice our instruments, and we still have to put the majority of our time into intonation. Well, conceptually and compositionally, this is a beautiful section. We have these minor chords with sevenths on top of that, which is a wonderful color. The problem with that is all of a sudden we have all these perfect intervals between multiple instruments. Boy, we need that to sound in tune. Not because we're worried about sounding out of tune, but because that's going to affect our resonance. And our resonance is going to affect our blend. And so actually our sound quality is coming from whether or not we're in tune. So they're all connected. So what we just did is basically the work that we did on this piece. We didn't hit anything in this piece except for running it other than those 3 bars to make sure we were getting them in tune. And I think we just played them 2 or 3 times in a row. Maybe one person made a comment about, oh, I think this E flat is this, or this, pointing out a perfect interval that maybe one of us didn't catch. We did it another time, and then we went on and we didn't really see it again until we ran it for Brittany. Maybe that is not anything new to you, but I just wanted to give you an insight as to, we get a whole score, what is the thing that we decide to spend the time on? Brittany says, I hadn't even thought about that. And that's fine, nor should you. I write quite frequently, and I try to make myself think about these things, but I know there's the time where that's not the job of the composer. That's the job of the performer, and to have to know how to look at a score and decide how do we transition this from the page to making it 3-dimensional, and this is part of that. Let's pick another piece.
Let's do the standard
Points of lead, okay.
This last
Oh,
name.
yeah,
Just the duo.
great. Let's do it how we originally did.
Yes.
Hayden, I don't know if Hayden is here, but he wrote a duo for us. And we'll play it.
I don't think Hayden is here. He had something come up, unfortunately. But you can still. Yeah.
So much more candidly, no. Here's how we originally performed it based on what was written. Okay, so after meeting with Mr. Iskander, who's a lovely gentleman, by the way, after talking and seeing a shocked face, and fast forward, here's how we actually played it. first of all, as a work, I think it works much better at that tempo. Really, that should be the tempo of it. But it affects a lot of technical things. Do you want to address any of the ones for you that it changed?
Well, certainly a lot of these have quick transitions between pizzicato and arco. So for me, I'm changing, okay, basically I'll stay here and just use one finger and not really transition between bow grips. And it certainly affects the rhythmic interplay between myself and Sean. At the slower tempo, we're more likely to give more rubato and more in-the-moment shaping. But at this quick in two, we've got 1, 2, and then ba, da, 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 da. There's this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, always going between the parts. And it's much easier to get into a swing of things. As performers, we are trying to play the whole piece in our head, even though we're only responsible for one part at a time. So that was the one thing that was really affected by tempo.
In terms of actual technique, I'm going to show you 2 places in the viola part that it just actually switched completely what I needed to think about. In the slower tempo, about halfway through, I have this lick. When it was slower, what was important to me was those fifths. The start of each bar was really important. The sound, how I did the shift, how the bow connected. At the fast tempo, what was important was the latter part of the bar, which are the 3 short notes. These. So at the faster tempo, at the slower tempo. Now, they both have their own difficulties, but they're different difficulties depending on the tempo, and they're purely technical about where I need to be in the bow. A faster tempo with this 5-note slurred followed by 2 short notes makes it really difficult to be in the right part of the bow. So for the faster tempo, I just had to break the bowing to be at the right part of the bow. In the slower tempo, I have all the time I need to finish slurring 4 notes, be at the tip of the bow, and then actually use the next up bow to be in the right part of the bow. But at the faster tempo, I have to stay here. Another technical thing is we get a lot of double stops, and a lot of them are 4 notes and 3 notes. At the slower tempo, we are going to take the liberty to break them. Part of that is a double stop, triple stop, quadruple stop for a pianist or for any other instrument who can do them. It does change the sonority, it does change the texture. What it doesn't necessarily change is the physical aspect of it. I can play 1 note the same way I can play 5 notes on a piano. In other words, my arm is going up, it's coming down, and I'm hitting those notes. Yes, there's a sound change, but there's not necessarily a physical change. For me to go from playing 1 note to playing 4 notes, it's a very visceral thing. All of a sudden, the shoulder in my right arm has to be engaged in a very specific way. All of a sudden, where the weight is being distributed changes. All of a sudden, my elbow has to help pull the bow down to get to all the strings for a very particular sound. So if I'm doing that slow, that's one thing. But at that fast tempo, there's not time to do that. Basically, I have to play them all as they're a single note. So I go from playing a 3-note chord like that to like this. Well, in order to achieve that, I have to play closer to the fingerboard because that's where the string has a little bit more give. It's not as tight. So I can, using bow speed, actually play 3 notes at once. If I try doing that at the frog, I have to break, or excuse me, if I try doing that toward the bridge, I actually have to break it. Now I can do that very quick, but it just makes more sense. Now, a 4-note chord, same idea. I try to make it sound like 1, with the bow speed. So it goes from to. It's a completely different technical setup. So in this case, the tempo change was a little bit more alarming just because I knew, oh boy, I'm going to have to be very aware of all these technical changes on the fly. Having said that, we were able to do that because those are expectations that I think are very reasonable for string players of a specific level.
Can we have a look at 10 and 12 before we move on?
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know what, a good place to start is probably bar 9.
Sure.
We're just going to play 4 more bars and have a look on what's going on technically here.
Can you just count off?
Okay, so I'm wondering, Sean, could you show us in slow motion bar 12, but with no viola hand, but it's just the bow? So what I'm seeing is to accomplish the crescendo.
You may have been standing in the way of the camera.
Was I? Oh, for shame.
So,
Sorry, I can't see the. So what Sean is doing is, in order to make the crescendo, he's using a faster bow speed. And despite all of the running notes there, my job there is to copy how quickly he is moving the bow, so that we both get the crescendo together, the accent is the same, and the following notes after that are the same. Can we just do 12 only? Mm-hmm. 1, 2. And that way, when I connect the string across the string crossing, then the gesture comes together, it works.
Can you explain why you made the change? Why did you make the change in tempo?
Oh.
I think this is
you
the
went
most
over
valuable part. I didn't hear it.
for anyone that was wondering, the reason we made the change in tempo, it was just a mismarking on Hayden's part. He had a quarter note equal something instead of a half note. So it was just a really easy thing to overlook, especially when you're in a hurry. But that completely changes how we might approach the piece.
Okay. Yeah. So just switching gears a little bit away from logistics in terms of technical stuff. I wanted to jump into actually one of the pieces that none of you guys have heard yet. We are preparing to perform it on Friday's concert. So what we had the pleasure of working on, well, the composer's name is not Maxwell, but we were working with, oh yes, with Morgan, on this part of a piece where actually the melody line is in the second violin part, and what we're working with in terms of dynamics is everyone is marked mezzo forte, and then with these long sweeping swells. It's okay. And so one directive that we received was, oh, I want this section to be more full in the other parts, the surrounding parts. And this was actually a really interesting point of discussion between the four of us. My instinct was, uh-oh, I'm going to be covered. Jason's instinct was something about how he's going to produce the sound rather than thinking about, oh, I need to play with more volume, and this might cover Aviva, but we'll see, maybe that's what we're looking for. So let's just play this section. This is at letter P. And why don't we play it the way we originally were playing it?
Sure.
Before we got the directive of full. Okay. I don't need this. Oh, thank you, did you? Yeah, so it's, again, hard to tell these sorts of things over Zoom because we're not in context of other dynamics, but we're not playing at our absolute max volume, right? We're still trying to adhere to this mezzo forte, maybe, we're not screaming, we're not thinking aggressively. So when we got the instruction about more full, Jason, can you tell me what you decided to do differently?
Sure. I think it was related to what I had decided up until now. I was using more of a thin sound. I was trying to make it a little bit more, is pristine the right word? I want you to hear every note, but I want them to be thin enough that they're not covering up my colleagues, because this is just objectively not very important. It's more like a color on top. So when I heard more full, I thought, okay, I need to change the sound, but not really play any louder. So for me, it was a few technical things. Maybe tilt my bow differently. Maybe slow the bow down a little bit. There's the individual sound, but there's also the sound that I know is going to happen when it's combined with the rest of the group.
Okay, cool. And then on Ryan, your end, I thought it was actually really interesting what we ended up changing in the way that you were playing your part. Can you actually play the before and after we talked about the full?
Okay, so what I have is a syncopated rhythm that's marked with tenuto marks. Now, I was thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to cover a viva, so here's what I did. Now, tenuto markings are somewhat flexible, so in order to thicken up the texture, here's what I did without really changing the dynamic. So essentially what I'm doing is, this would be, I would call this a sound that has release versus a sound that's totally sustained and connected.
Cool. Yeah. So these are just some of the micro changes where just the word full kind of triggered these different thoughts. Can we actually play it now after we got this instruction?
So some of you might be wondering, well, he had tenutos in the part. Why didn't he play it that way to begin with? This is very clear. Well, there's a couple things. One, different articulations mean different things. First off, the different instrument groups, as we talked about with some of you, but also the different players. Players who are coming from a strict classical background, a staccato has a very specific role depending on what era you're talking about. And I suppose it comes down to context clues in your parts to whether or not this is part of this tradition from here, or, oh, this is a new music articulation, or short is short, or this is that. And you don't really have control over that other than other things that are written in the score to give the performer a clue. So here would be an example. If I got a part that said andante molto, and underneath diminuendo, sul tasto, and then I have articulations, I'm already in the mindset of a classical work, simply because of the words that are being used. Versus if I get something that says, fast but not too fast, quarter note equals this, underneath, getting slightly louder, all of a sudden, just the fact that it's in English, the way it's written in a way that doesn't insinuate a specific definition to the words that are written, other than what the words just mean themselves, that already puts me in a different mindset. So that would be an example of context clues. The other thing is that, especially in this case, we have maybe 30 seconds looking through your scores when we first get them to decide how much we trust you. And that trust comes from a couple things. If you have a couple mistakes here or there, yes, absolutely, that's fine. If those mistakes keep coming back, or more mistakes start appearing, all of a sudden we don't trust you as much. All of a sudden, when this thing is written here and pizzicato is written but the notes are slurred, we don't look at it and think, oh, he wants us to ring. We think, oh, he forgot that this wasn't supposed to be pizzicato. And it's those little changes along the way that, again, we start making decisions that are on the fly because this is what we have to do when we learn music quickly. So if we've seen certain things in a part, and now we're on page 3 and we have all these tenutos, even though that might mean played a certain way, based on the context clues from the score and other things that have allowed us to look at it a specific way, that's going to influence how we play that tenuto. And again, there's not really that much you can do to control that other than being so clear in your parts and scores, having page turns, accidentals marked correctly, courtesy accidentals. All of these things are not there because it's more correct. They're there because it shows us as a performer that you as a composer are thinking about us, and therefore we can trust you more. There's a reason that when we play a Beethoven quartet, that we take every single marking absolutely seriously. It's because it has to be there. And of course, the advantage there is there's hundreds of years of books and other interpretations that have tried and failed to go away from that, and the realization that actually it sounds the best when you trust Beethoven. So it's not that we play Beethoven and trust him implicitly. It's that there's a reason to have trusted what's in that score to begin with. And every composer living today is trying to build that trust over time as well. So I just wanted to lay that out, that that's, none of this is a purposeful decision on our end. Oh, I'm not going to trust him at all. It's a decision that's made very quickly as we're learning pieces like this, where we have to learn 8 or 9 pieces in basically a week and a half or 2 weeks.
By the way, sometimes those things Sean is talking about, I agree with, and in orchestras you see this even to, I would say, sometimes a more extreme version. Even listening to it, they're totally unfair. I think the reason we're telling you that is, even though it's unfair, it happens, right?
That's the practical real world of having to learn music and perform it for a living.
Yeah, and so the idea is hopefully that if you're thinking about these things, these are all ways to keep you from sort of being judged harshly and unfairly.
Ian, you had a question if you're still in the chat.
Hello?
Hi.
Is my audio working now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering, since I kind of went an atypical route with counterpoint and the whole 2 concept to the electronics, I was wondering how you all navigated around such an instruction and such a concept of not having a definite response, but being able to control it with a certain kind of audio threshold. I was just curious how that was from a performer aspect.
For anyone that doesn't remember, this was the piece that Aviva played for solo violin, and Jason and I had our cell phones out to create a feedback loop.
Yeah, so for my personal experience was actually there were 2 kind of components that were a little confusing. There was the score, and then there was an email that was kind of giving me some instructions, and just kind of piecing the 2 together was kind of half the battle. So in this particular context, it worked out wonderfully because we kind of had this allotted time to actually talk about things, and I think especially when there is something that's either, it hasn't been done before, or it's kind of hard to put into words what you tested out at home, that sort of thing. So the email gave me a clue as to, oh, okay, like there's going to be a phone involved. Are there 2 phones? Am I on the phone? Am I playing the phone or playing the violin while I'm on the phone? So those sort of like logistical things where actually words are so important, and it's kind of hard to explain in prose something that you have done experimentally, and just it kind of made sense. For me, I am like coming out of, wherever, and I have no idea of any of this. Like, I've never tried this sort of feedback loop while playing the violin with these sounds. So half the battle was really figuring out, what am I supposed to do other than play the violin? Because that part is very, the notation was pretty clear. I just didn't know that some of the things that were notated were things I didn't actually have to worry about. It was what the phones would just naturally do. So I think, yeah, it's kind of context driven in terms of whether the instructions are, oh, okay, this is like a jumping off point, and then we'll kind of work together to kind of figure out how to make everything work. Yeah, please add.
Can I just add something from the perspective of the cell phone artist, along with Sean? And this is kind of funny because I don't know if this is fair to say, I'm probably more judgmental than my colleagues in terms of how far I'm willing to go and what is art and music, that sort of thing. But what's so fun is that when I'm in the moment doing something, that turns off and the performer turns on. And what I thought was really interesting about your piece was, once I think I understood what you were after and what types of sounds you were after, and we had tested it together and we found some things that work, I found myself so frustrated in the live stream because while we were practicing, can you stand over here? I made sure to keep track of how close I was to Aviva, what angle the phone was at, how the volume was, what fingers were on what buttons, that sort of thing. And then when we started the piece, I thought it was not nearly as effective as when we had rehearsed it. And a lot of the places that we were getting loops were not working. And so here we are in this moment where we barely got any time to get to know it. And Sean's over there, and we're trying to communicate over, just our eyeballs with our masks on. Like, I'm thinking in my head, turn it to the side, come closer, try this, whatever. And you could probably see his hand trying different things, trying to find where's that sweet spot. And I don't know if that is anything valuable, but for me, it was so interesting to think that I was actually I was really invested in making it work and really disappointed when I wasn't able to get what I thought was really something really cool.
Tag me in. All right, tag. So you guys, first of all, we apologize for doing so much talking today. And I apologize if this is a lot of stuff that I'm sure most of you have already thought of, but we are hoping that this is valuable information from the standpoint of a group that our job is to perform. That is what we do. I wanted to say that context. Any amount of different electronics or extended technique that you can dream up, that you give to us, that still pales in comparison to the amount of actual already extended technique that we have to do to play something like Beethoven. Another way of saying that is, to play Beethoven correct takes way more wide range of techniques than playing the most avant-garde piece you could think out there. That does not have as many techniques. That's just how difficult these instruments are to play. Someone who is performing these instruments for a living has spent years and years mastering things to play a certain sound, the most resonance, the most beautiful sound, 20 different types of vibrato, to be able to listen to their colleagues in a specific way. So when we get a piece like Ian's, I think it's very easy for standard performers to get a specific attitude about that, because you're basically being asked to not think about any of the things that you've spent your life thinking about. That's just context. The reason I'm saying all of this is, Ian, you did a beautiful job of communicating to us when we had the session with you. You were earnest, you were honest, you had an artistic vision, and you had tried it so you could explain how it worked with you, and that absolutely made us, or me, definitely want to make it work for you. So in this case, here we are, classical quartet. We do a lot of other styles as well, but it was the personal connection that made that piece, I think, for me, really come to life. Just keep that in mind when you're writing things that leave the spectrum of what it takes to be already a good violist or already a good violinist. You're asking someone to leave behind years and years of practice and technique that's already built, to have to go do something that is now on top of it, and they don't know what that final product's going to be like. It's fascinating to think about, also, I think, important.
Well, thank you for that very heartwarming compliment. It means a lot to kind of transcend a barrier of just notes on a page to music, and in whatever ways I was helpful in that journey, I appreciate. And hats off to all of you for your effort and just making this, like, I went back to the live stream to listen to it. I'm like, wow, that is some of the best music making I've ever heard in my life.
Thanks. Well, thanks to you guys. Any other questions or anything that you guys want us to address? I know we've been very verbose.
Hey, I very quickly had a question about how you guys as performers approach form and stuff, and like in terms of recapitulations, themes, etc. And
Could you just type the question for us? Because it cut out at the very end.
yeah.
We need it. Everyone can see the question there, I think. We absolutely need it. We want to understand the music. We want to interpret it. We want to bring our own thing to it, but we want to do that from a point of understanding the context. So, yes, that's my short answer. We like it, and we think it's very, very valuable.
You can maybe poll the individual members, but what I'd like to add is I love form, I love music to be repeated, and I love music to be transformed. And I'm always open to the possibility that even if the same material comes back note for note, rhythm by rhythm, it's maybe not necessarily the same music because it's had this whole journey that's already happened before it. Like in terms of a recapitulation or when material comes back, when I interpret it, I think, well, is this the same music? It's the same notes. I'm not sure because it's had a range of experiences since I heard it last. So that's something that I'm thinking about.
Are there other questions on there, Jason?
I don't think so. Really. People are saying thank you. All right. Well, thank you guys all for writing some awesome pieces for us. We're looking forward to, I think we have another type of talk about career development and things on Wednesday. And then we're looking forward to the concert Friday. Again, feel free to email us if you have questions on things. We're happy to take time if we can find it. So thank you guys for being here with us this afternoon.